Good evening, everybody. And if the music was not any indication, welcome to our Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy graduation and our final Wheelhouse Talk of the year. I cannot think of a better way to culminate this year of ambiguity, adjustment of expectations, tremendous pain, and tremendous growth than with a keynote from our forward-thinking and innovative leader, President Philomena Mantella. This year, I have been continuously in awe of the leadership and strength displayed at our university. Yes, by our administration, but more specifically, by the students on our campus and in our program. We proved that even as our world was turned upside down, we kept our focus and determination on learning and growth. I cannot express my gratitude or pride enough for our 2020-2021 cohort of fellow candidates. I know that when our benefactors, Peter Cook and Ralph Hauenstein, sat down with the goal of developing ethical and effective leaders for the 21st century, Zoom breakout rooms, Kahoot trivia, and virtual networking was not exactly what they had in mind. Even if our year has looked slightly different than previous years have, I am confident in the personal growth I have witnessed and even more firm in my faith of the great changes this group of students will make in our world. In just a moment, I will introduce one of our outstanding graduates, Caro, to introduce President Mantella for our final installment of the 2020-2021 Wheelhouse Talks speaker series. What an honor it will be to hear about the leadership journey and lessons from Grand Valley State University's 5th president. After President Mantella's opening remarks, Caro will rejoin her on the screen to help facilitate audience Q&A. Please take this opportunity to thoughtfully engage our university's president in an intimate setting by utilizing the Zoom toolbar to submit questions at any point throughout our event. After audience Q&A, please stay on the call as we celebrate our 2021 Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy Fellows in a short graduation ceremony. I would now like to turn the microphone over to Caro A. Popobe, who I am thrilled to say will be graduating with a Master of Science in Higher Education through GV's College Student Affairs Leadership Program this weekend. Help in virtually welcoming Caro to our screens.
Hello, everyone. Before I take the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, please allow me to express my gratitude to Grace and the entire Cook Leadership Academy team for giving me this opportunity today. Did you know that with more women completing a degree in higher education, women only make up 30% of college presidents across the country? According to a 2017 survey that was conducted by the American Council of Education. Our guest speaker is an educator and someone I'd say as an inspirational leader, known for our work in collaboration across sections and designing partnerships to improve pathways for diverse learners across their lifetimes. With more than 3 decades of higher education experience in diverse roles, she has also excelled in her mission to ensure institutional integrity and build consensus for the mission and noble cause of education. Since joining Grand Valley State University in 2019, a drive to expand access to the university and implement initiatives that would foster a more socially just and inclusive community has become quickly evident. She has also led with charisma during a time where our country was faced with a pandemic, racial and political unrest, and was also able to rise to the occasion and achieve great outcomes for the GVSU community. We are the future leaders in our community, and who better to share their wealth of knowledge and leadership experience with us today than our guest speaker. Would you all please give a virtual applause as we welcome President Philomena Mantella.
Thank you so much, Caro, and thank you, Grace, as well, and to all of the folks at the Hauenstein Center and the Cook Leadership Academy for the work you've done all year long. And as you said, for persisting, not only persisting, but thriving during a very challenging period. So what a pleasure to be with you on the final talk of the year. And I took you seriously, Grace and Caro, when you said it's a talk. And to me, that's different than a speech. So I want this for all of you to be very conversational and to take your questions. So I am going to do my very best to set the tone. And I've been giving some thought to this conversation and say, what are, it's a great opportunity when you get to think about your leadership and your leadership style, and to reflect on it, and to think about, what were the elements that were most important? How did I discover my strength? How did I gain my confidence? How did I determine priorities? All questions I'm sure you're asking yourself, whether you're still in your academic program or for the nearly 30 students who are completing their degree and moving on with their professional life, although continuing to be a Laker for a lifetime, we hope and we pray. So as you reflect on those questions, it's important to always stop and think about your journey. And it's hard when you're in roles like I have to do that, to find the time to reflect. And so you've afforded me that gift. So thank you for that. And I'm really honored to be the final speaker of the year and here where I can see and celebrate the graduates. So the way I've prepared this talk is to offer sort of 10 thoughts about leadership that have been important for me. And I promise I won't go deep on those 10 and use our time together on those 10. They'll be quick hits. I'm going to make 3 book recommendations in the course of the areas that I discuss with you, and then we'll just open it up for questions. So forgive me that they may sound like headlines, but I want us to get to the conversation. So this won't surprise you if you followed my journey at all. And as Caro said, what's really important to me personally is the notion of equity and social justice. And achieving that is a systemic challenge. It's a challenge that's complicated, and it's a challenge that needs to be considered at every spectrum of lifetime learning. And so when I think about that in terms of the role of a leader, the first thing that comes to mind is to learn, to always learn, to always position yourself as a leader and a learner. Those aren't two discrete roles that we play. They're intertwined inextricably. And the opportunity to learn is everywhere. It's in this conversation. It's when I walk on the street with my dog and I talk to folks that are here in Grand Rapids and they have a perspective on the community. It's when I am at my office late and the cleaning staff comes in. It is absolutely everywhere. And so I encourage you to think about all of the opportunities that you have to learn, and they will become opportunities to lead, to infuse your leadership, to understand not only your journey, but the journey of the people around you, which is what leadership is. And I want to give you one book recommendation on this very first, point, which is this book, Think Again by Adam Grant. Comes, I can see it's backwards in the screen. So Think Again by Adam Grant. It's the power of knowing what you don't know. And it really helps you to think through the power of the question, the power of curiosity, the power of thinking, the power of being interested in the people that come in your life. There's a quote I really enjoy from Ginny Rometty, executive chair of IBM, who said, "I learned to always take on things I've never done before. Growth and comfort don't coexist. If you're always comfortable in your leadership role, chances are you're not growing." I can personally tell you this year has made me very uncomfortable at times, so I'm really excited about the growth that's happening for me personally this year. The second is brave leadership. And to me, that's leading from wherever you are. It's that simple of a concept. Where can I lead? Where can I lead? What am I doing in my life that I can step in and lean into the opportunities to lead? Third is to be authentic. Be who you are. And the growth will help you to figure out who you are. So, I'm a first generation college student. I came through a college experience that wasn't very informed early on. It was, I wanted to get to college. It was that simple. My life opened up and I explored things I never expected to explore. I had to work many jobs to try to kind of make it all come together, because I picked a fairly high-priced private university, mainly because it was 30 miles down the street and I had a comfort level there. But I allowed myself to become uncomfortable the more I explored and pushed myself in my university experience and my work experience. And those two began to interrelate. I remember very young in my leadership journey, really being uncomfortable with not being, as I used to call it, buttoned up on every presentation that I made. I could anticipate any question you were going to ask me, and I would live in terror that I didn't do the proper preparation. Some of you may have this kind of, mindset, it's a perfection syndrome, right? So you go down all the possible scenarios. What I learned about what I was doing when I was leading was that I was not creating space or being authentic about my own learning, my own journey through that conversation and through that stance. I was responding so fast and so crisply that people were uncomfortable with the questions. I was not willing to say, that's really interesting. I never thought about that, and explored what was behind the question, which is usually a beautiful thing. So be authentic and be brave. I want to give you another recommendation, which is a book that I've just finished, that one of my female colleagues, For the Women in the Room, In the Company of Women, by Grace Boney. And it's really just a lot of collections. It's what you're doing with me today. It's a lot of collections around leaders in just this incredible range of fields and backgrounds, working at large startups, at companies and fashion in the US, in London, in Nigeria, everywhere. And so you'll get a lot just by reading the stories of leadership and trying to place yourself in those stories, not to say I'm like this person or that person, but to drive your own self-understanding. The fourth area, and it's one that you don't hear as commonly as a phrase, but it's something I believe in deeply, I call network leadership. Again, early on in my career, I thought where my strength came from was how I organized, how competent I was, how clear I could be, how clear on the strategy so people knew what to do. But what that didn't allow for is to make room for people to find their passion within the organization, to find their energy with one another, to solve problems together. And so I had to figure out for myself, leading large organizations, how do you create the opportunity for people to take the things you're talking about in your work and create a way for them to self-organize. Hey, I really want to work on community policing. Hey, I want to really work on creating the first living learning center for freshmen in Grand Rapids. Hey, I really want to work on. And how do you allow those experts? Now you get this great opportunity to have people take those problems on from different vantages, coexist with structures that are made to organize energy. One structure is to organize energy, right? The hierarchy, there's a president, and 8 vice presidents, and 9 deans, and we're all structured to organize our energy, where networks are made to unleash energy. And so how do you allow those two things to coexist? How do you create some frameworks around what you want to organize and allow people to have the space and permission and empowerment to work through networks? And then what does that and how does that inform the more structured organization? And I like to think about that as network leadership. And the best example, and I guess all my books are to the front end of this based on the way I organize this, of that type of work is the book Believe in People, which many of you may have read through your journey, by Charles Koch and Brian Hooks. Interesting fact, I learned that Brian Hooks is from East Grand Rapids. And I didn't know that, and is CEO of a group called Stand Together, which really works in a matter of networks. It looks for small philanthropic organizations, and it takes the energy of people with seed funding and moves it forward, and then clusters and organizes these networks of networks to inform and learn and enrich each other's work and make movements more powerful. So also really important. But I like to think of myself as a network leader as well. The fifth area I would ask you to think about is, who is your panel? Who's your panel? Who's going to make you a strong leader? When you think about being in an organized class section, right, you think about, I'm going to make a presentation, and maybe Caro says, Grace has been so helpful to me, I'm going to ask her to preview it. I live, even at the age I am and at the stage in leadership I am, with my own thought leadership panel. Every year, there's not a year that goes by that I don't have that. And they're people based on the work I'm doing that I can rely on to not hold a stakeholder position, but to provide feedback and thoughts. I have a comfort with them where they're going to challenge me, my notions. They're going to tell me I'm wrong. They're going to push my thinking. So I always have a panel. Now, I don't meet with them on a Zoom call with 6 people, on a topic. Sometimes I do, but most frequently it is a group of individuals that I can call on and relate to based on the work. I also use that panel to create my mosaic, and that's what I want to make as the 6th point. The mosaic that I think about is a mosaic that says, what is my leadership profile? So when I came to Grand Valley and I got the call from the search firm, and they said, hey, we understand you have a Michigan connection, because I was here for my PhD. They knew that, many years ago. And you've been in higher education. You've worked on a number of different dimensions of higher education. You've spent the last decade in academic innovation. We're really interested in you. I had to think about my leadership profile, my mosaic, as I like to call it. I have this visual, because I like networks, right, of like this spider webby thing that says, here's the way my picture comes out. And for me personally, I was not, Caro mentioned that only 30% of academic leaders are women, educational college university presidents. It's even less, it's closer to 20% if you look at the type of institution that I lead. And so when I think, so I'm not a traditional presidential candidate, not just by my gender, but my background. Most presidents come out of the academic track. They were faculty, they went up the faculty ranks, and then they went to department chair, and then they went to dean, and then they went to provost, and then they went to president. That's the most common track, as many of you probably know that are studying higher education. My track was very different. And so what I had to think about is, what was my platform for leadership? What was my mosaic? And I was about a 360 view of higher education. I was a candidate who had been in all levels of higher education. I'd been at a community college, I'd been at a small graduate institution, I'd been at a flagship public, I'd been at a regional public, so my journey took me to all sorts of institutional sectors, and my journey took me to all dimensions of university leadership, from academic leadership, which ultimately I got at the end of my career when I was leading an academic innovation accelerator, because, that was a space where my skills related, that it was not a space where a traditional track was valued as much as the ability to think differently about what we do in education. And so I had gone and I had, been a VP for student affairs. I'd been a senior VP for enrollment. I had been an academic leader. I had run an academic accelerator on all of these institutional dimensions. And so my platform, or my mosaic, was about the breadth that I held to lead in an environment, which we learned a lot about this year, that required agility, required different ways of thinking, different ways of organizing, ways to use that was resource constrained, and ways to use all of your institutional energy. So that I call it a mosaic rather than a profile, because I like to think about it as missing some spaces on that beautiful sort of picture that you're creating. And so it also would allow me to say, what do I need next? How am I going to fill out that picture? So that is number 6. So the panel is helping me to reflect. The mosaic is helping me to see my strength and identify my weaknesses, identify the areas that I want to grow. So a few other things, and then we'll open it up for question. One is encouraging you to work at the intersection. Presumably many of you are in different fields. Caro is in education. She has a background in law. Already, she has an advantage to some of us perhaps on this call. She's worked in different industries, and she's looking at intersections between different fields. That's where knowledge is created. That's where the world is going. We're not organized by majors and minors. We're organized by the things that we need, the competencies we need, the new directions that are coming. If you just think about science and where it's coming from, it's coming out of the intersection of data analytics and biology and chemistry and biochemistry and behavioral neuroscience, right? So the intersections are very important. And if you're in a more traditional role, like my traditional administrative role, my intersections may look like, don't look for all the solutions to come out of education. Look for some of the solutions to come out of industry. Look for commonality. So one of the things that I looked at carefully is in COVID, what were the industries that were thriving and why? What were the unexpected industries that were thriving and why? You expected Amazon to thrive, right? They had this huge infrastructure. We all stayed home. We needed things to come to us. But what were some of the ones that were surprising, that began to emerge, and why? And then also look for things that have a common shift or change. So when you think of higher education and the changes we face, we might think of the world of mobility. How does it change higher education if the world is increasingly mobile? We saw the opposite of that this year, right? We saw it stop in its mobility, its global mobility. But if you think about some of the innovations that are on the tech front, that are saying it's going to take not 5 hours or 6 hours or 7 to cross the country, that based on the mobility and the way in which the field is progressing, it's going to take 2 hours or it's going to take 45 minutes. What does that mean to education? So look at the intersection of industries. I also encourage you as young leaders to work, I like to call it work between the lines. Never accept the organizational chart as the organizational chart and think there's nowhere for me to go. My supervisor's got a job, I'm going to stay forever. This is my space, this is my field, I got to leave. So I used to give a talk at my former institution called Finding, supporting talent retention by working between the lines. So I would make up things all the time. I would say, okay, this structure isn't work. We've got this high performing individual. How do we find a place between the director and the dean, or between the dean and the vice president? And again, you always have to you can create chaos if you're not also looking for coherence. But even as you think of yourself as a young leader, and this leads me to my next point, which is put yourself out there, take some risks, say that I'm really interested in moving forward. A couple of more junior people came to see the president early on. It happens all the time. And I always take the meetings whenever I can. And they just tell me about themselves and what they're passionate about and what they're working on in their PhD study and what they want from Grand Valley and what they think I really like it when they tell me what I'm doing well and what I'm doing poorly and what their observations are and where I think we are and where they think we are. Because it's a really rich conversation, but what is it telling me about them, their ability to think, and my commitment to them, my interest in them, helping them move, but helping them move our organization. I'm always looking for the alignment between people's personal passion and personal energy and organizational energy. Because if you can find that alignment, you know, there's no one, when we do things we love, I mean, probably some of you have competed in sports and you have to ask yourself, you know, why am I spending, 75 hours a week on the track? You know, it's because I love it. You know, I'm passionate about it. It's done something for my character or my person. So I would encourage you to think about, taking risks, putting yourself out there. And the last point I'll make is that leadership is impact. Leadership is impact. So there's a couple things I wothe CEO YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki wrote in a recent article, rarely are opportunities presented to you in a perfect way, in a nice little box with a yellow bow on the top. Here, open it, it's perfect, you'll love it. Opportunities, here's the good ones. No, they're messy, they're confusing, they're hard to recognize, they're risky, they challenge you. So allow yourself to be in that space where you're finding your way through the challenges. You're putting yourself out there. Lastly, I said leadership is impact, and that's because it's not only about who you are and how you're growing, what your title is, but it's about the impact you're making. It's about the contagion you're creating in the people around you to lead and to contribute and to be contributing on multiple levels. I got some very nice notes after yesterday's State of the University address that I did, if any of you attended, talking about the past, the present, and the future coming out of this year. But one of them said, you make the rest of us want to up our game. That's my job. I want everyone to up their game. That's the only way. You can't depend on 8 people that report to you or 10 people that report to you. You have to create a contagious energy that make people want to up their game. So with that, I'll just open it up for questions. Those are tips that have helped me. I know they were a little, you have to realize it's 5 o'clock on the last week of the term, State of the University, the Board of Trustees meeting tomorrow, commencement. But please forgive me if they were not as succinct as I might usually do. That's me being vulnerable, see that? But let's open it up to questions and get into it. So Carl, back to you.
Awesome. First of all, thank you, President Mantella. I really enjoyed your speech. I was just taking notes the entire time. Before I kind of open it up for questions for the audience, I do have one question actually. Just hearing you talk, I mean, like I said earlier, I've been privileged to listen to you talk since you joined GV, and I know you're very passionate about social justice and, fostering an inclusive community at GV. I don't know if do you mind sharing some initiatives that, future students or current students are able to see, and, something that goes beyond maybe education programs for the GV police. What are some other initiatives that are in place going forward? Because I know that this is a very huge issue right now in the US.
Yeah, I think the first initiative is to diversify the leadership, faculty, and staff of the university, because this is a predominantly white community, And if you're a person of color, you want to come in and you want to see people like you want to feel comfortable, you want to be able to move and navigate to various environments very, with a lot of energy. So the first is, and I've done that. I've done that in terms of the 2 positions I've filled at the vice president's level. We just hired, you probably haven't met Michael Coleman yet. He starts tomorrow. But he also is a Black man from, believe it or not, I got someone from the Virgin Islands to move to Michigan. He's a VP for human resources there. Bahamas, I'm sorry, not the Virgin Islands, Bahamas. And very skilled. Hopefully he'll stay when winter comes. He did come in the middle of winter to interview, but it's not about representation. It's about really cultural competency and making space for diverse voices and making space and leaders that are going to take on all of the elements, whether they're curricular elements, whether they're the climate and the way in which we create community, whether it's our talent progression for high performing faculty, staff. So that's one dimension that I'm very, very big on. The second is I do have a network for racial justice. You heard me talk about networks that are working on 15 different projects. You mentioned one, an evaluation of our community policing initiative, if there's any changes we should make, but there are many in that are important. And I've activated 100 people that are spending time, energy, making recommendations and creating action. So that's a second piece of it, creating the network. And the third is students. And I'm really pleased, I mentioned this yesterday at the State of the University address, that our diversity in our admitted student class is way up. And part of that is the commitments we've made to regions that are diverse in our state. We created a Grand Valley promise in regions that have lower socioeconomic levels that will, if you come from that region, your tuition will be covered and will support at minimum the tuition level at the university. So we've created access and we've been more intentional about our recruitment strategy. And I think now what's key is to actually realize those results or yield those results, because that will help us move forward as well. If we move from our 5, 6, 7, 8% populations numbers to 10 and 15 and 20%, become more representative of the state at large, climate and culture will change.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, President Mantella. So I'm gonna start off by the so we do have one question here. It says, what would you say was your biggest challenge when navigating the male-dominated industry? And what advice would you give to an aspiring female college administrator?
Yeah, what a great question. Thank you for that question, Hannah. I think the biggest challenge is to feel comfortable being yourself when it is in fact dominated by a majority group, whether it's by gender, it's by color, it's by sexual preference, whatever it is, it's being comfortable being yourself and bringing the fullness of yourself to the role, rather than to say, I'm going to hide that I get emotional. I'm a crier, I admit it. Now that's associated with gender, right? So at the end of my State of the University speech, and people have commented on this, when I said students are my hero, you could tell that I was having trouble getting those words out. And, that would have been something I would have been very uncomfortable with and say it was a weakness or a shortcoming. You got to be yourself, because in that there's such beauty. And it's diversity really coming in its fullness into the community. So, I know that's hard, but I would say just go for it.
So great. We do have another one. Someone wants to know, give me a second. Yes, sorry about that. Zoom difficulty right here. So does knowing that you are one of the few female university presidents impact the way that you lead?
You know, it's almost one of the hardest questions I get, because it's hard, you know, sometimes if you're really close to something, and we certainly are to who we are as a person, you can't see as clearly how it impacts the way you lead. It's a question and I'm going to turn the question just a little bit differently, because something I do at times when people say, what is your leadership style? Or in this case, what does it mean to be a female president? How does it affect your style? I'll say to you, Cara, what is my leadership style? And the reason I do that, because if you can't observe it, if the students on this call can't say, well, you know, I think she's really innovative, or she's really informal, or she's really, if you name it differently, then I'm not conveying it. It's really not my style. So I struggle a little bit with trying to separate my gender from my leadership from myself. So I don't know if anybody wants to put in the chat how they think being a woman has affected my leadership style. I would love to read it. So I invite you to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, President Mantella. Someone here also wants to know how growing up in Omaha, New York, kind of like prepared you for your career path and where you are now.
Okay, Sheila, now somebody knew I grew up in Homer, New York. That is really impressive. She did her homework. Well, it wasn't a very diverse community, that's for sure. And it was a very it would be tantamount to growing up in Northern Michigan in terms of it was rural. The options to really, my school did not have a breadth of curriculum or experiences. Culture was a secondary consideration, you know, music, art. So those were all new for me coming into my collegiate world. And I had to get comfortable with that because you know, I found myself at a private school where people from downstate, from the New York City area, which was, you know, my environment, would be so much more cultured, sophisticated, had so many more AP classes, had so much more opportunity. So it really affected me by not feeling good enough at times and having to understand again that my journey had other kinds of strengths. You know, maybe my journey in a smaller place with more limited opportunities enabled me or required me to go deeper, to create things that weren't there. And so I do think it affected me to grow up in a small town in upstate New York.
Excellent. These are all like really great questions. I'm very much impressed with our cohort. Someone here is really like happy that you spoke about intersections, and they wanted to know what ways you envision the future of GVSU community and kind of like what the world of work encompassing interprofessional studies and building up students' skill sets would look like.
Yeah, it's a great question too.
It's very loaded.
There's so many things that you know, my problem, and again, I know that if you ask my senior leadership team, they'd say, you know, her problem is she's got so many ideas and so many things that she wants to bring to this university, and the opportunity I see here, because I see GVSU as an incredibly special place, that kind of prioritizing among them is really important. So I'll just throw out a few things that relate to intersections. So one is we have wonderful liberal education here. I think it is enriched even further if people can work on the problems they want to solve and the mission they have in life through the liberal education. So rather than a course menu or a course set, it's, and you know where that happens a great deal is the Cook Leadership Academy, right? You're working on your own leadership frames. It happens in our honors program, when sustainability and clean water become the subject through which someone strengthens their liberal education. So I'm really excited about how do we go further than major to mission and problem solving. That makes me really excited. I think the future of education is going to have many more intersections between work and life and education, learning. And so this kind of notion of people come in, we all come in at the same age, same time, we all go through 8 semesters, we leave. It's not sustainable. It's not going to be the only way to pursue education. So I get really excited about what are the various models that students we can respect, we can appreciate what's happening in their life, that they need to work, that they have family, that they can make the space to come to college to a full-time residential experience. And how can we translate our educational assets to all of those different areas and models? I see, and I announced at the last board meeting, something called Next Ed Accelerator. I see that we can't look at our educational model as it starts at kindergarten, it goes all the way through, and you have 12 years or 16 years or 18 years of education. We've got to look at it more of an ecosystem. Even our levels don't make sense: undergraduate, graduate. Why? I have a PhD, 30 years in higher education. If you ask me to take physics, I'm at a freshman level, right? If you ask me to take something else, I'm at a PhD level. So we've got to appreciate what people are bringing to the work. That's being learner-centered. And then help our education map to where they are. It'll make it more powerful. I guess simply played is it maps to where one is, and it's personalized in a way that it's driving to where they want to go. And if you're keeping your panel and you're keeping your mosaic, then you're always rethinking that. Every new experience, I didn't wake up one day and say, I want to be a college president. Every new experience gave me the opportunity to think about my journey. And so, but I see all of those different dimensions in the future.
Great. Someone else said your talk reminded me of a quote that I love that goes, opportunities found where responsibility is abdicated. And then they asked a question: where is responsibility currently being abdicated within our community? And how can we as fellow candidates step up and lead daringly?
Oh, you guys rock. I think that the way in which I would, the first thing I would describe is something that I brought to Grand Valley called acceleration teams. And so, and I'll tell you a problem that we were working on. And so we identified opportunities at Grand Valley. And we said, what are opportunities to accelerate our thinking? So everyone I talked to in the Kirchhoff College of Nursing would say a few things. The world needs more nurses. They'd say, we have hundreds of students who want to come to Grand Valley and be nurses. And we need to think about, what are the constraints that are keeping us at the current size? Well, there's accreditation constraints. There's all sorts of different constraints. So rather than solving that through the dean, the provost, and the president, which would be the traditional way of fulfilling responsibility, we gave up that responsibility to an acceleration team. And what became more interesting about the acceleration team, of course, there were key leaders in nursing in that area, but they were joined with the dean of engineering. They were joined with faculty from other disciplines. And so again, at intersections, because the way they thought about problem sets was helpful in addressing it. The acceleration team wasn't a decision-making team, but what it did is, if you think about if I can use a football analogy, you're almost to the 50-yard line. You want to get to the 20-yard line to pop the ball in. And you need a group that's going to move you from the 50 to the 20 quickly. Okay. So it was really, they would come and say, here's the 3 things that we should consider. And now we can come back together with them who think differently about it now and us, and move it forward together. We've done that around talent epicenters, which are ways to bring business, industry, startup entrepreneurs, Grand Valley students who might be able to enrich an entrepreneur's business notion together. And we have an acceleration team working on that. We had an acceleration team who made the recommendation that we should put 4 new living learning centers in Grand Rapids and have Grand Rapids be a place one can choose to start their educational journey, rather than to progress into the professional schools and reside in Grand Rapids later in their educational journey. So those are 3 or 4 examples where we empowered others and a broader group than those that were kind of holds the responsibility by title.
Thank you. For this academic year, one of the things we talked about through our curriculum was how to deal with ambiguity. And the next question kind of like ties into that. So someone here says, what advice would you give to someone who is going back and forth between choosing an opportunity in a career they know well and choosing an opportunity they're unfamiliar with, especially when they're kind of like fearful of failure? And I know, like you talked about this earlier in your talk, that growth and comfort do not coexist. So I'm just curious to know what you think.
Well, I have come to love ambiguity. Now, remember when I described myself, ambiguity was not my friend. And it was, it really was the journey that I had of moving from an area that I knew extremely well. It's what I did my studies in, and it's where my work began, and I progressed to broader responsibility and moving over to lead an educational accelerator. And so the first thing that I would say is, don't get intimidated by the discomfort, but find the conditions that can support you being a risk taker and being in ambiguity and having some failures. People always say, and fail fast, and know when it's failing and be able to abandon or pivot to a new direction. All of that is true. But the environment I was in was an institution that I'd been at for, 10 years. They knew me well. They knew what I did well. We had trust built. And when I went to try something new, I knew I was in a place that tolerated failure, and that in a place that I had a level of trust. I'm not sure I would have left what I was doing, gone to somewhere that was entirely new and create all the conditions that made it a high risk venture for me. So calibrate the risk you're willing to take. Don't remove risk. Don't make it a polar decision. I stay in my track or I take a risk. Find the gradation of risk that you can tolerate that gets you to a level of discomfort, and then find places that have those conditions to move, so that experience will be a positive one, hopefully.
Thank you, President Mantella. I think we have time for a couple more questions before we wrap up the session. So here's another question. Going through the ranks in your career, did you recognize poor leadership? And if so, how should we respond to learning from these situations?
So the instinct when you recognize poor leadership is to not lean into it. You've determined it's poor, right? And so why would you lean into the conversation with poor leadership? And really, that's the opposite of what you should do, because if you lean into it and say, I really think you're struggling with your leadership journey, or it's out of sync with where our institution is going, or some manifestation of why you're determining, I don't like the word poor, but I'll use it to be poor. If you lean into that, first of all, you'll be curious and you'll learn, are you right or are you wrong? Is this a fit? Are you not seeing yourself in the organization? Are they perceiving you differently? It'll be great learning. The other thing it'll do is it's fair, it's right, it's humane. You'll tell that person what you're experiencing, why you're experiencing it. You'll come to some understanding. Most people, if they assess poor leadership, will say it's poor. And I'm going to have this meeting at 5 o'clock Friday, 10 of you're going to come in. I'm going to tell you it's poor and I made the decision to move on. You can do that. There's not much learning there. There's not much humanity there. And so that I would say lean into it.
Great. Here's another one. You spoke on having a panel. Reflecting back on your leadership journey, Have there been consistent folks on your panel, or have you frequently had to like rebuild your panel from the scratch with new opportunities?
Yeah, both. So there's some people like I can't let go of because they're just always, thinking about the future. They have equity and social justice in their heart. They appreciate the work, and we have a relationship that emerges. And then there's others. I always try to diversify it, to find people. And I'm just, because I love to think future and think boldly and broadly, I'm always discovering people. And so, my challenge many times is, finding the space and time. On the questions you didn't ask me, I saw that there was a question about, reading and finding the time and space to read and finding the time and space to talk with thought partners or your panel. Got to do it. I mean, it may sound crazy, but when I have a vacation, I get so excited to take these books, I just like it, like I finally get to think and reflect rather than to be on a Zoom call or in a meeting, so, find those places and spaces. We never do enough of it, but we need to do some.
Excellent. So to kind of like be respectful of everyone's time, I think this is the only question we can, right. Cool. This kind of like ties into what President Mantella, you were beginning to talk about from this previous question I just asked. Someone here says, leaders like you and like those that make up the Cook Leadership Academy are typically highly motivated, driven, and passionate about working hard, and therefore highly susceptible to burnout. How do you take time for yourself to debrief so you don't get overwhelmed?
Yeah, so it's awesome question. I don't do that very well. I have a high energy level. I don't require much sleep. I've got some things that help me through. But what I do is I make the space in meetings to debrief, and it's really helpful so that I don't have and it's 3 steps rolled up into 1 step. So almost every meeting we'll say, okay, what do people take away from the senior leadership team? And we'll go around the room. Or if it's a topic, we'll make the space to go around the room. I'll make the space and I'll work hard people will think, well, is she a note taker? Well, no, I'm trying to synthesize so we can get to the next place. And that helps me because I'm one of those people that I go home and if I've got a list, I feel good. If I don't have a list, it feels like chaos, So as long as I can organize it, as long as I can make a little space to debrief and a little space to synthesize and reflect the observations back, I have the energy to keep moving. And so it's hard though. It's really hard. And we all have to work hard on it. It really is an important question. So thank you. And thank you for giving me so much time to share a little bit of myself.
Yeah, and this is the end of our question and answer session. I just want to say thank you to everyone in the audience. These were really great questions. Thank you for engaging in this space with us. And thank you again, President Mantella, for taking time to lead this Q&A session. I really, really enjoyed the talk, and I kind of like got to learn more from some of the responses that you gave to the questions asked. Thank you.
Welcome. And thank you, Caro, for helping to facilitate that question and answer. I can speak as myself as a woman, the 3 of us here on this call, all being women. It has been a powerful couple of years of seeing the leadership of this university led by a woman. Even from inauguration, I remember your family being there and feeling inspired that you can have a powerful career and have powerful impact and still be really powerful and present with home. So I thank you for your leadership. I thank you for tonight's authenticity, vulnerability. And I'm coming away with many notes too, and many on my next to read lists. So thank you again for being with us. I would now like to turn our focus a little bit to recognize the hard work and dedication of the 26 students that we have graduating from our Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy. Through this last year and more, these leaders have shown up authentically and vulnerably, committed to their personal development and eager to take that into the spaces that they enter. They have spent time dissecting themselves as they grew in their capacity of self-understanding. They challenge our societal norms of success and practice the art of creating a vision that is meaningful to them. Through group conversation, self-examination, and a critical eye on our historic and current practices, they are charged with action to lead our world in the direction of justice. I have witnessed these students lean into the complexities of our nation and hold high-level dialogue on controversial topics through a very tense year. And through this year of continual ambiguity, they have been able to make meaning of their experience, and I am confident that they will continue to lead through ambiguity with poise. The development of these competencies is just a glimpse into the vigor that they each live their lives, and it has been an absolute pleasure to share a piece of their journey with them. Tonight, these students accept the permanent title of a Hauenstein Center Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy Fellow. Fellows, as you take this title into your next steps, please know that you made all of us here at the Hauenstein Center better for knowing you, and you will continue to have that effect in every new community that you lead in. I would now like to officially introduce our 2021 Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy Fellows. Sarah Anderson, Katie Beamer, Chloe Chenoweth, Abby Cooper, Hannah Dunham, Trevor Dunn, Caro Epopove, Ben Friedman, Gregory Goodwine, Reese Green, Ryan Gross, Elizabeth Henderson, Elizabeth Hurt, Megan Matter, Kendra Marchini, Lauren Moyne, Rachel Morin, Ashley Orman, Megan O'Neill, Caitlin Ortiz, Hero Parker Drost, Phoebe Risk, Camila Russo, Janiyah Thompson, Brianna Wisty, and Havala Imker. Thank you to our graduates for sharing your Grand Valley experience with us. We could not be more proud of your accomplishments, and we wish you could see all of the applause that I'm sure all of the folks joining are giving you today. Thank you again, President Mantella. I truthfully cannot express my gratitude enough for showing up with us tonight, imparting your wisdom, and joining us in this celebration of our graduates. To everyone who tuned in to tonight's program, please complete the post-event survey, which should pop up on your screens after closing the Zoom webinar. To our CLA fellow and fellow candidates, please join us in the Zoom meeting where we can officially applaud you and give you one last final send-off before you head into your next steps. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us tonight, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.